Hi all, we are going to talk now about the Garrisson bands, the Garrisson matrix system, and how to put that on. We call it a Garrisson matrix system a lot, but it's also just called a sectional matrix system. The Garrisson system is a specific brand, and there are other brands that make the same type of a sectional matrix system. I just have a habit of calling it Garrisson. And so when I say Garrisson and sectional matrix, they basically mean the same thing. So unfortunately for this hands-on remote portion of this lab, it's a little bit minimal. The reason for that being is because in order to properly place a Garrisson matrix system, you need a couple supplies that I don't have for you. You have watched a video on the Garrisson matrix, and you'll see that you have a little metal matrix, which I like to call a bean. You have your little metal matrix, and then you also have a ring that goes around the tooth and actually holds this into place, similar to how a Toffelmeier retainer would hold a Toffelmeier band in place. You have a Garrisson or a sectional band, matrix band, or a ring that would hold this into place. And you guys will actually buy those they come in your restorative kit that you buy from the bookstore, and you guys haven't bought those yet, and we don't have enough at PCC, and I couldn't find any of them when I went and was digging through boxes. So long story short, we don't have the rings for you to try. But what you are going to learn and show me is that you can correctly place this little bean in position. Okay, so when you look at these little matrix bands, you can see that they are curved. They are an anatomical type shape. And so that is that shape for a reason. There's a couple different curves to them. First, if I'm looking straight on, I notice that there is a kind of U-shaped curve on the bottom edge, and there is a U-shaped curve on the top edge. So the U shape, I'm going to call it the convex part of it, is going to go towards the gingiva, and the concave goes towards the occlusals. So if I'm working on the mandible, I'm going to take my band, and it's going to be in a U shape, and I'm going to go straight in between the tooth. If I was working on the maxillary, it would go this way. So it would be a little upside down smile, because this curve is going to face the gingiva. Okay. And then you're going to notice that it also has a curve this way. This is pretty obvious, is that this hugs the tooth. So this curve is going to, if I'm working on the distal, it's going to go in like that. If I'm working on the mesial, I'm going to flip it around like this and go into the mesial, and it's going to hug the tooth. You can see that fits real nicely. And then if you look at it from the side, you can see that nice curve, like, oh, it's so beautiful. It just hugs the tooth. So when you put these on, you're not going to use your fingers to do this, because there's saliva in the patient's mouth. It's really slippery. So how do you do it? Well, you use cotton forceps. So we're going to take our cotton forceps, and we're going to slide it down between the tooth. So I'm pretending I'm working on 18 MO here. If I'm working on a DO, I'm just going to put another one on the distal. But so this is for MO. So I just kind of slid it down. You want to make sure when you look down on it that you've got equal band sticking out from both sides. And you also want to account for the type of prep you have. So if your prep was like really wide on the mesial, you want to make sure that this band fully covers wherever that edge is. And then what you're going to do is, so you're going to place this, and then what you would do is you would put a ring on it, and that ring would put pressure like this. So it's going to take those little loose ends, and it pushes them against the sides of the tooth to create a seal. And then you would also place a wedge as well. So you've got your little wedges, and like with the Toffelmeier, you would typically place your wedges on the lingual. And again, this is because the lingual embrasure space is wider than the buccal. And so that's where you're going to place your wedges. That one is too big for this. Let's try this yellow. And when you're doing a Garrisson, sometimes when you're working with a Garrisson, depending on the product manufacturer and who your teacher is, and kind of just the situation in general, sometimes you will wedge before you put the ring on, and sometimes you will wedge after the ring. So you always put the matrix band in first, and then depending on the situation, you will either do the wedge and then the ring, or the ring and then the wedge. And it kind of just differs based on what you're working on. But again, just like when we're working with a Tafelmeier, you want to make sure that this is wedged well. So that means that when you put your wedge in, you should feel some resistance. And you want to see kind of an equal amount of wedge on either side, the buccal and the lingual. One thing I noticed that I would change about this is when I look down on this now, there's a little bit more of this band sticking out on the lingual, and there's a little less, so it's not very even. So I would kind of shift that so there's a little bit more, it's a little bit more centered on that mesial surface, but not too bad. There's probably still enough that if I put that ring on there that it would catch it. So that's how the Garrisson works. And again, if you're working, that's just for like an MO. If you were working on an MOD, then we would take a second matrix and we would put it down on the distal. This one's a little tight, so I'm going to use a Greg here to kind of open up that contact. There we go. So you can see now I have one on the mesial, one on the distal. And then what you'd end up doing is using two of those rings, those sectional matrix rings. So you'd probably, and there's different ways to do it. You might have one ring going this way and then one ring going distal if the patient's mouth allows for it. Otherwise you would have to layer them. So you'd put one going this way and then one on top also facing this way, if that makes sense. So it just depends on the situation, but that's how you would place the actual bands for this. And then when you're taking these off, you want to be gentle like we did with the Tafelmeier, but remember you're only going to use a sectional matrix like this for a composite filling. And when you go to take these bands off, your composite is completely set. So you're not risking breaking a composite by taking these off. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove this little wedge. And then I can just use my cotton forceps to wiggle these bands out. With a composite, sometimes they can be a little tough because you get like a slight bond to them and they're nice and tight, but just work on wiggling those out. Use my fingers. All right, so that's Garrisson. So good luck with the Garrisson, and let me know if you have any questions.